Chapter 14. Ocean World. In the stilled and dry air of the desert night, Daniel and Fate finished their conversations with Madison, Ryan, and Natalie. They decided to go radio silent until they could get away from Vogel to a safer place. In the light of the crescent moon, the cutter was barely visible over the dunes. Fate stood from his crouched position, helped Daniel to his feet, and they made their way back. As expected, Vogel was not asleep. "It's about time," he grumbled. "I was beginning to think you got lost." "We did for a bit. But now we're back on track, Shadrach," said Fate cryptically. "We should get some sleep and—" Vogel grunted at the mention of sleep. "And have a look around in the morning." Daniel had already pulled himself into a corner, hugging his knees and resting his head. Vogel made no argument, and Fate sat with his back against the wall. In the morning, they ventured out of the cutter to meet a cloudless sky. The chill of the night was already melting away. The dunes stretched to the horizon in each direction. Always the first to speak, Fate declared, "We have three options. 1. We wait here for someone to rescue us. 2. We try to walk out of a desert of unknown size without any water or compass. 3. We get back in your box and see if it will take us home." Vogel had been studying the horizon. Through the fog of his damaged mind, even he could see the foolishness of walking out into a desert with no water. The absence of any evidence of airline traffic across the blue sky made waiting for rescue seem equally foolish. He pulled his pistol out and waved it at Daniel and Fate, indicating they should get back in the cutter. Fate clapped his hands. "Number 3 it is," he said cheerfully, and they climbed back inside the cutter. "Turn it on, boy. Take us back," Vogel ordered, and closed the hatch. Daniel dropped to his knees in the darkness and groped his way over to the generator. He pulled the drill's trigger and locked it before lunging for the safety of the corner. The motor whined, and the dry air quickly built a powerful static charge on the silver sphere. The white spark inside a blue halo struck the wall with a loud bang. The cutter lurched upward and to the side. The generator clattered over and slid to the wall. Vogel stumbled. His old Zippo lighter hit the sandy floor. Dim gloom was replaced with complete darkness. The cutter halted its upward acceleration and bobbed. Water and slivers of light seeped in at each seam between the wall panels. The heap of sand shifted to the rear, along with the cutter's 3 passengers. Their weight acted as ballast, preventing the cutter from resting upright. Daniel crawled along the rear corner, groping for the generator. "We're underwater!" shouted Fate. Daniel's hand landed on the silver ball of the generator. "Shut up, Fate!" shouted Vogel. "Boy, find the generator and turn it on!" "It won't stay in the center," Daniel complained. "It has to be level." The cutter shook and began to rise slowly. It was still not level, but at least the rolling had stopped. "What was that?" demanded Vogel. "Are we still underwater?" His answer came as the leaking at the panel seams was replaced by slender shards of bright sunlight. The water on the floor was slowly draining out, but at a much slower rate than it had entered. Daniel tried to prop the generator upright in the center of the leaning floor, but failed and laid it on its side instead. Vogel brought the pistol out again and waved it at Fate as he stepped beside the hatch. "Open it! Let's see what's out there!" Fate hesitated, but complied and moved to the hatch. Daniel took a position behind him. As Fate worked the latch, bright sunlight poured in. They shielded their eyes and moved closer. Nothing but blue sky and white clouds were visible until they reached the opening. A warm and moist breeze caught their faces as they looked down to see that they were atop a soft-looking gray surface. It extended a dozen feet in each direction where it met the flat surface of the water. Apart from the strange tiny island, there was nothing else in sight. Glistening, calm water stretched to the horizon. Vogel lifted Daniel and tossed him through the hatch before Fate realized what he was doing. The man's strength was bordering on supernatural. "Check it out, boy," he growled. Fate shoved Vogel aside and leapt through the opening. Daniel was on his hands and knees examining the grey surface. The air was heavy with humidity and the strong, salty odor of the sea. He ran his hands across the smooth, wet surface. It was warm and featureless. "It's some kind of marine life," said Daniel. The desert world had left them all very thirsty, and Daniel scrambled over to where the cool water lapped at the edge of the flat animal. He tasted his fingers. Salty. Disappointed, Daniel stood to get a better look at the overall shape of the thing under his feet, but it was impossible at that angle. He rushed over to the cutter and used the raised edges of the panels to climb to the top. From that vantage point, he could see its outline clearly. "It's a ray," Daniel called down to Fate, "or at least it's ray-shaped. They don't ever get this big at home. And look." He pointed to a spot closer to the edge behind Fate. "It's a blowhole. This must be a whale, a ray-shaped whale. Fascinating." Daniel dropped to a sitting position and began sketching in his notebook. "Do you see anything useful up there?" Vogel demanded, but Daniel ignored him. Fate tried to climb to the top as Daniel had, but lacked the required agility and fell onto the creature's flat back. It shuddered. "Daniel," Fate called up, "perhaps we should—" He was about to say, "Leave!" when the surface of the water churned. Hundreds of glistening black eels slithered out of the water and onto the dry surface. As they emerged and stopped squirming, it was obvious that they were not eels, but sea snakes taking the opportunity to bask in the sun. "Stay away from them," Daniel called to Fate. The snakes had kept to the edges near the water, but nothing prevented them from coming closer. Sea snakes are venomous, at least the ones on our world. "Not more of that nonsense," snarled Vogel. "This isn't some alien planet. We're just in the ocean somewhere." "How many flat whales have you ever heard of Shadrach?" argued Fate. "Honestly, you can be pretty—" He stopped as the cutter rose and fell a few inches in a gentle roll. Another ray whale surfaced 20 feet away. It sprayed a fountain of misty water high into the air as soon as it broke the surface. Others joined it, and soon more than a dozen were enjoying the warmth of the sunlight. As they surfaced, more snakes slithered onto their backs. "Daniel, come down here," said Fate as authoritatively as he could manage. "This thing could dive at any moment." Daniel was too engrossed in note-taking and sketching to answer. "Now, please," Fate insisted, and Daniel finally complied, closing the notebook and jumping rather than climbing down. The ray whale shuddered at the impact, but was otherwise unperturbed. Daniel joined Fate at the hatch, and Vogel backed away to let them in. Fate turned around to close the hatch, but noticed a commotion on the neighboring ray whale. A webbed hand slowly reached up out of the water and quickly snatched a snake. The creature rose out of the water enough to swing the snake in the air and bring it down hard on the ray whale's back. It slapped on the wet surface and writhed in the hand of its attacker. Another swing and another hard smack ended the snake's suffering. The humanoid creature rose the rest of the way out of the water and onto the ray whale. Its back was to the cutter, so it was unaware that it had an audience. "An aquatic hominid," whispered Daniel in fascination. It was the size of a child, rail-thin with webbed feet and hands. Another snake slithered too close. The creature turned and lunged but missed, giving them a better look at it. Its back was as dark as the ray whale, but its chest and the front half of its legs were pale white. From behind, it could have been mistaken for human, but when it turned, they saw its face was inhumanly distorted. Its eyes were at least twice the expected size, but the strangest feature by far was the nose. Rather than below the enormous eyes, it loomed eerily just above the forehead and had been reduced to little more than a pair of slits. Its webbed hands and feet sported claws rather than nails, which it began using to shred the dead snake. "Oh!" exclaimed Fate a bit too loudly. The creature spun around and saw the three faces in the cutter's hatchway staring back. It leapt into the water. Daniel scrambled to lift the hatch's door. Fate helped, and they got it closed, just before a loud bang announced the arrival of the humanoid. It pounded on the wall a few times before climbing onto the top for more pounding and scratching. The cutter's metal roof screeched under the claws of their attacker. The sounds stopped. An eerie silence followed. They listened in the near darkness. Their eyes slowly adjusted to the reduced light peeking through the seams. "Is it gone?" asked Vogel flatly. "Look!" shouted Daniel. He pointed to the hatch's lever. It was slowly rotating. Fate was closest and lunged, pulling it back to the locked position. The creature hissed in frustration. "It might be a good time to leave, Daniel, don't you think?" said Fate, still holding the handle as firmly as he could. Daniel dropped to the floor and examined the generator. He flipped the clock on and squeezed the drill's trigger, but when he tried to retreat to the corner, it began to slide with him. He grabbed it in time to push it to the center before it finished its cycle. The bright white arc struck the wall with a now familiar, deafening bang. Daniel exhaled.